When tomorrow feels uncertain, faith must become louder than fear. There are mornings when you wake up with questions instead of answers, with weight instead of clarity, with silence where direction should be. You don't know what the day will bring. You don't know how things will turn out. But hear this truth clearly. Uncertainty is not the absence of God. It is often the place where he does his deepest work. When tomorrow is unclear, you don't need more control. You need deeper trust. You don't need to see the whole road. You need to know who walks it with you. The same God who carried you through yesterday is already standing in your tomorrow, preparing strength you haven't used yet and grace you haven't seen yet. So take a breath, still your heart, and let this prayer rise. Let us pray. Father God, this morning we come before you not pretending to be strong, not pretending to have it all figured out. We come honest, we come open, we come aware that tomorrow is unknown, but you are not. When our minds race with what ifs, remind us of who you are. When fear tries to write the story, interrupt it with faith. When we feel unsure, teach us to lean instead of panic, to trust instead of control. Lord, you see what we cannot see. You know what is coming before it arrives. You are not surprised by obstacles, delays, or detours. So today, we place our future in hands that never fail. We surrender the pressure to figure everything out. We release the burden of trying to carry tomorrow's weight today. We refuse to let anxiety steal the peace you promised. God, guide our steps one decision at a time. Order our thoughts so fear does not lead us. Guard our hearts so doubt does not rule us. When doors close, give us discernment, not discouragement. When plans change, give us faith, not frustration. When answers delay, give us patience, not despair. Strengthen us for what lies ahead. Prepare us for what we don't yet understand. Align us with your will, even when it challenges our comfort. Remind us that you are our provider before we have a need, our protector before we sense danger, our peace before the storm even forms. Today, we choose trust over tension, faith over fear, prayer over panic. We declare that no uncertainty is greater than your authority. No tomorrow is outside your control. No situation is beyond your power. Teach us to walk forward without needing all the details. Teach us to obey even when clarity comes later. Teach us to rest, knowing you are working even when we cannot see it. Let this day be led by your Spirit. Let our words reflect your wisdom. Let our actions show your confidence in us. We step into this day believing that whatever tomorrow brings, you will bring us through. And now hear this clearly. You may not know what tomorrow holds, but you know the one who holds tomorrow. You don't need a perfect plan. You need obedient faith. You don't need certainty. You need courage anchored in God. So rise today with confidence. Walk today with purpose. Pray today with expectation. Refuse to let fear decide your future. Refuse to let worry replace worship. Refuse to stand still when faith is calling you forward. Make the decision today to trust God fully, boldly, without reserve. Pray before you panic. Believe before you see. Move forward, even when the path is foggy. Start this morning with prayer. Live this day with faith and step into tomorrow knowing God is already there. Uncertainty has a way of shaking us at our core. The moment we don't know what's coming next, our minds rush to fill the silence with fear, worst case scenarios, and anxious predictions. But what if uncertainty is not your enemy? What if the very thing making you uncomfortable is the doorway to deeper trust? Here's the truth most people miss. When life becomes unclear, God is not pulling away. He is inviting you closer. Think about it. When everything is predictable, faith is optional. When the outcome is guaranteed, trust becomes unnecessary. But uncertainty strips away illusions of control and exposes what we truly rely on. It forces a decision. Will you depend on fear or will you depend on God? The unknown is not a punishment. It is a proving ground. It is the place where faith stops being theoretical and starts becoming personal. Right now, you may be standing in a season where answers are delayed, plans are unstable, and the future feels foggy. You pray, but clarity doesn't come. You plan, but doors don't open. And that's where frustration begins. But what if clarity is not what you need most right now? What if trust is more valuable than understanding? God often withholds details not to confuse you, but to teach you how to lean on Him instead of leaning on information. Uncertainty exposes our habits. When you don't know what tomorrow holds, do you panic or pray? Do you overthink or surrender? Do you grasp for control or do you release and trust? These moments reveal whether faith is something you speak or something you live. Because real trust doesn't require explanations. Real trust rests even when questions remain unanswered. Here's a hook that changes everything. God never asked you to trust what you can see. He asked you to trust Him when you cannot. If you could see the outcome, faith would not be necessary. If you had the full blueprint, trust would be replaced by logic. But God's invitation in uncertainty is not to figure it out. It's to rely on Him. That reliance builds spiritual strength you could never develop in comfortable seasons. Fear says, what if it all falls apart? Faith responds, what if God is setting something up? Fear assumes loss before anything happens. Faith expects God to move, even when evidence is missing. The same unknown that produces anxiety can also produce growth, depending on which voice you listen to. Uncertainty magnifies whatever you focus on, fear or faith. You may feel unprepared for what's coming, but God never sends you into a future without preparing grace ahead of you. You may feel weak, but weakness is often the signal that God's strength is about to be revealed. When you stop demanding certainty, you make room for dependence. And dependence is where trust becomes powerful. Another hook to grab hold of: uncertainty does not mean God is silent. It means He is teaching you to listen differently. Sometimes direction doesn't come as a map, it comes as peace. Sometimes guidance doesn't come as answers, it comes as assurance. God may not tell you what will happen, but He will always remind you who He is. The unknown teaches you how to walk by faith instead of sight. It trains your heart to trust character over circumstances. You may not know what tomorrow will bring, but you can know this today. God is faithful, God is present, and God is in control. When uncertainty knocks, it's not asking you to panic. It's asking you to trust deeper, pray harder, lean fully into the one who already stands in your tomorrow. Most people delay obedience because they are waiting for clarity, but clarity is rarely the starting point. The truth is uncomfortable, but freeing. You don't need the whole plan to move forward. You only need the next step. The problem isn't that God isn't speaking. It's that we want the full picture before we're willing to act. We want guarantees before we give trust, certainty before we show faith, and answers before we take action. Here's the hook that shifts your perspective. If God showed you every step, you would rely on the plan instead of relying on Him. Full clarity often creates independence, not intimacy. When you know everything in advance, you stop listening moment by moment. But when you only know the next step, you stay connected, attentive, and dependent. Faith is not about seeing far, it's about obeying now. We often say, once I understand, I'll move. But faith says, move and understanding will follow. Obedience is the door that opens insight. Many people stay stuck not because they lack direction, but because they refuse to move without certainty. They confuse hesitation with wisdom and delay with discernment. But delay can quietly become disobedience when fear is the real reason behind it. Another hook to confront the heart: God does not guide parked cars. Movement invites direction. When you take the step you already know to take, make the call, forgive the person, start the habit, apply for the opportunity, step away from what's draining you, God meets you in motion. Waiting for perfect clarity often means missing divine timing. You may be praying for a map, but God is offering a step. You may be asking for the destination, but God is asking for obedience. The next step may feel small, uncomfortable, or even insignificant, but small steps are how big faith is built. Breakthrough rarely comes from one dramatic leap. It comes from consistent obedience in moments that feel ordinary. Fear loves to disguise itself as caution. It says, be careful, wait a little longer, think it through again. But faith says, trust me and move. If you already know what God has been nudging you to do, clarity is not your issue. Courage is. The longer you hesitate, the louder doubt becomes and the quieter faith sounds. Here's another hook. The step you are afraid to take is often the step that unlocks the next instruction. God does not reveal step 2 to those unwilling to take step 1. When you obey Hua, God reveals what you need next. Direction unfolds as you walk, not before you move. You don't need to feel ready. You need to be willing. Readiness is a feeling. Willingness is a decision. Many people wait until fear disappears, but fear rarely leaves before obedience. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's choosing to move despite it. The next step will stretch you, but stretching is how growth happens. You may feel like this step is too small to matter, but obedience is never wasted. Every step taken in faith builds momentum, strengthens trust, and sharpens spiritual sensitivity. What looks minor to you may be monumental in the process God is shaping. He uses steps to prepare your character for what your future requires. Here's a final hook to confront hesitation. God is more interested in your obedience than your comfort. The next step may disrupt your routine, challenge your preferences, or require sacrifice. But obedience always positions you where grace can meet you, strength can find you, and direction can continue unfolding. Fear doesn't usually arrive screaming. It creeps in quietly through unanswered questions, delayed results, and silent moments where nothing seems to change. It gets loud when faith goes silent. The moment prayer weakens, worry steps in to take the microphone. The moment trust pauses, fear starts narrating your future. And if you're not careful, fear will speak so often that it begins to sound like wisdom. Here's a hook that exposes the battle. Fear grows in the absence of faith-filled words. What you don't confront with prayer, your mind will rehearse with anxiety. Silence is not neutral. It is an open door. Faith stops speaking. Fear fills the gap with assumptions, exaggerations, and worst-case scenarios that feel real even when they aren't. Fear feeds on imagination without truth. It asks questions like, what if the fails? What if I lose everything? What if it doesn't work out? And if those questions go unanswered by faith, they begin to dominate your thinking. Fear doesn't need facts to grow, only silence. That's why moments without prayer often become moments of mental chaos. Another hook that shifts awareness: fear is loudest when you try to fight it in your head instead of surrendering it in prayer. You can't outthink fear, but you can outpray it. Prayer doesn't just calm emotions, it realigns authority. It reminds fear that it is not in charge. When you pray, you are not informing God, you are reminding your soul who is in control. When prayer fades, perspective distorts. Small problems feel massive. Temporary delays feel permanent. Obstacles start looking like dead ends. Fear has a way of magnifying uncertainty until it feels unbearable. But faith has a way of shrinking fear when it is exercised. Faith doesn't deny reality, it recenters it around God. Here's another hook to grab hold of. Fear speaks in urgency, faith speaks in assurance. Fear says, act now or you'll lose everything. Faith says, wait, trust, and listen. Fear pressures, faith steadies. Fear rushes, faith anchors. When you stop praying, fear speeds up your thoughts until peace feels impossible. Prayer is not a ritual, it is resistance. Every time you pray, you are pushing back against fear's authority. You are declaring that your emotions do not lead you, your circumstances do not define you, and your worries do not rule you. When prayer stops, fear doesn't just talk, it takes over. Fear also isolates. It convinces you that you are alone in your struggle, that no one understands, that help is far away. But prayer reconnects you to God, to hope, to truth. Fear says, you're on your own. Faith responds, I am not alone, and I never was. That response only comes when faith is given a voice. Another hook worth confronting. Fear is persistent, but faith must be intentional. Fear shows up uninvited. Faith must be exercised on purpose. You don't accidentally walk in faith, you choose it. You choose to pray when you feel overwhelmed. You choose to speak truth when lies feel convincing. You choose to trust when outcomes are uncertain. Fear thrives on repetition. The more you replay anxious thoughts, the stronger they become. But faith also grows through repetition. The more you pray, the more you remind yourself of God's power, presence, and promises. What you repeat shapes what you believe. When prayer becomes consistent, fear loses its grip. Fear wants the final word. It wants to define your decisions, limit your courage, and shrink your expectations. Faith interrupts that narrative. Faith says fear doesn't get the microphone. Faith speaks louder through prayer, declaration, and trust. But if faith is silent, fear will gladly take center stage and rewrite your story in the language of doubt. The battle is not just around you, it's within you, and the volume of fear is directly connected to the silence of faith. When prayer weakens, fear strengthens. When prayer stops, fear multiplies. When faith speaks again, fear begins to retreat, because fear cannot survive where trust is actively exercised. One of the greatest sources of peace you can ever receive is this truth: God is already in your tomorrow. Before you wake up to face it, before you worry about it, before you even imagine it, He is already there. What feels unknown to you is fully known to Him. What feels unprepared in your life has already been accounted for in His plan. The future does not rush toward you randomly. It unfolds under divine supervision. Here's a hook that changes how you face the day. Nothing you will encounter tomorrow will surprise God. Not the challenge, not the delay, not the confrontatio, not the opportunity. You may feel caught off guard, but God never is. He stands in the future with the same authority He holds in the present, arranging moments, allowing tests, and preparing outcomes that align with His purpose. We often live as if tomorrow is a threat instead of a promise. We imagine the worst, assume failure, and prepare for loss before anything has even happened. But fear only exists because we forget who goes ahead of us. If God is already in your tomorrow, then tomorrow is not something to fear. It is something already covered. Another hook to settle your heart: God does not send you into a future He has not already prepared grace for. Every challenge comes with provision already assigned. Every burden comes with strength already available. You don't receive grace weeks in advance. You receive it right on time. That's why worrying about tomorrow drains you. You're trying to carry a weight you were never meant to carry today. You may not see how things will work out, but God sees the full picture from beginning to end. He sees the connections you don't see, the conversations you haven't had yet, the doors you haven't reached yet. He knows which doors will close and which ones will open, and he knows exactly why. When you trust that God is already there, you stop panicking about what's ahead and start walking with confidence in the present. Here's another hook that reframes uncertainty. Tomorrow is not empty space. It is occupied by God. The silence you fear is not abandonment. It is divine positioning. Sometimes God stays quiet because he is working ahead of you, arranging things you don't yet need to know. Silence doesn't mean inactivity. It often means preparation. God is not chasing your future. He is governing it. He doesn't react to circumstances. He allows them with intention. What looks like a delay to you may be protection. What feels like a setback may be redirection. When you understand that God is already in your tomorrow, you begin to trust even when the road curves unexpectedly. Another hook to confront anxiety. If God is already in your tomorrow, then worrying today won't improve it. Anxiety assumes responsibility that doesn't belong to you. Peace comes when you return that responsibility to God. You were never meant to control outcomes. You were meant to trust the one who controls time itself. You may feel unqualified for what's coming, but God never calls you into something without going ahead of you first. He prepares environments before he prepares experiences. He aligns circumstances before you arrive in them. What you call the unknown is simply a place you haven't reached yet, but God has, the future does. Does not demand your fear, it invites your faith. When you know God is already there, you stop rehearsing disaster and start expecting guidance. You stop bracing for impact and start trusting direction. God's presence in your tomorrow means your tomorrow is already being handled, shaped, and overseen by hands stronger than your doubts. You may not know what the future holds, but you don't walk into it alone. God is not behind you, pushing you forward. He is ahead of you, preparing the way. Every step you take is a step toward a place where God has already arrived, already planned, already positioned himself to meet you there. We are taught to believe that control equals security, that we can manage every detail, anticipate every problem, and plan every outcome, then we will finally have peace. But control doesn't create peace. It creates exhaustion. The more you try to hold everything together, the more drained you become. Peace does not come from having everything under control. It comes from knowing who is in control. Here's a hook that challenges the mindset. Control feels responsible, but it often hides fear. When you refuse to let go, it's not always wisdom. It's worry dressed up as discipline. Control says, if I don't handle this, it will fall apart. Faith says, even if I release this, God will sustain it. One posture tightens your soul, the other frees it. Surrender is often misunderstood as weakness, but surrender is actually strength in alignment. It is the decision to stop fighting battles you were never meant to win on your own. Surrender doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop carrying what is too heavy for you. Peace arrives the moment you admit, I cannot do this alone, and place the weight back where it belongs. Another hook that exposes the struggle. Control demands certainty, but peace thrives on trust. Control wants guarantees. Peace rests on God's character. As long as you insist on understanding everything, your mind will remain restless. The need to control is a sign that trust has been replaced by anxiety. But when you surrender, you trade pressure for presence. Control also distorts your priorities. It keeps your mind busy with outcomes instead of obedience. It shifts your focus from faithfulness to fear of failure. You begin measuring success by how well you manage things rather than how deeply you trust God. Surrender recalibrates your heart. It reminds you that your responsibility is obedience, not outcomes. Here's another hook to reframe surrender. Letting go does not mean giving up. It means handing over. You don't drop things into chaos. You place them into capable hands. Surrender is not passive. It is intentional trust. It is choosing to release your grip even when your emotions resist. Control promises safety but delivers stress. It keeps your body tense and your thoughts racing. Surrender promises rest and delivers it. That rest is not laziness, it is confidence. It is the assurance that God is working even when you are not. The more you surrender, the more peace you experience, because peace flows from trust, not from effort. Control also limits your spiritual growth. As long as you insist on being in charge, you never experience the freedom of full dependence. But surrender stretches faith. It forces you to rely on God's wisdom instead of your own calculations. It trains your heart to trust beyond logic. Another hook to confront resistance. Peace is not found in holding tighter. It's found in releasing deeper. The tighter you grip, the more anxious you become. The moment you open your hands, you make room for peace to settle. God cannot fill hands that are already clenched. Surrender doesn't remove challenges, but it changes how you face them. You stop panicking and start praying. You stop reacting and start trusting. You stop exhausting yourself with what ifs and start resting in who God is. Control tries to predict every outcome. Surrender trusts God with every outcome. You were never designed to carry the weight of tomorrow, the pressure of decisions, and the burden of results all by yourself. Surrender is the act of returning those weights to the one strong enough to carry them. Peace follows, not because circumstances change immediately, but because your posture does. When you stop trying to be in control, you finally experience the freedom of peace that only comes through surrender. Waiting for perfect clarity is one of the most common reasons people remain stuck. We tell ourselves we'll move when the picture becomes clearer, when the fear fades, when the risk feels smaller. But faith was never designed to function on certainty. Faith moves when clarity is incomplete and the path ahead is still blurred. If you wait until everything makes sense, you may wait forever. Here's a hook that confronts hesitation. Faith does not follow sight. Sight follows faith. The road does not light up all at once. It reveals itself step by step as you move forward. Standing still will never produce clarity. Motion is what activates direction. The path responds to obedience, not hesitation. When the way is unclear, fear suggests retreat. Faith suggests movement. Fear says you might fail. Faith says you might grow. Growth never happens in comfort zones. The unclear path is not a signal to stop. It is often the sign that you are being stretched into something new. God rarely leads people down familiar roads when He is preparing them for greater purpose. Another hook that reshapes perspective. Clarity is not the prerequisite for obedience. Obedience is the prerequisite for clarity. Many people pray for guidance while refusing to move. They want reassurance without risk, but faith requires action before confirmation. The step you take in uncertainty is the very thing that sharpens your vision. Moving forward without clarity requires courage, not confidence. Confidence comes after obedience, not before it. Courage is choosing to act, even while fear whispers warnings. The presence of fear does not mean you are wrong. It often means you are on the edge of growth. Fear shows up where faith is being exercised. An unclear path forces you to trust character over circumstances. You stop relying on what you can see and start relying on who God is. That shift is powerful. It changes how you interpret obstacles. Instead of seeing them as signs to stop, you begin to see them as confirmations that you are walking by faith. Here's another hook that challenges comfort. Staying still feels safe, but it slowly drains purpose. Movement keeps faith alive. When you move forward, even imperfectly, you give God something to work with. Progress doesn't require perfection. It requires willingness. You may worry about making the wrong move, but paralysis is often more damaging than a misstep. God can redirect a moving life, but he rarely steers someone who refuses to move. Even wrong turns can be used for growth when the heart is obedient. Forward motion keeps you teachable and dependent. Walking without clarity also builds spiritual resilience. Each step taken in faith strengthens trust. Each act of obedience increases boldness. You begin to realize that you don't need full understanding to experience God's guidance. You need availability. Faith grows stronger when it is practiced, not when it is postponed.
Another hook to confront fear. Uncertainty is not the enemy of faith. It is the environment where faith thrives.
When the path is unclear, you learn how to listen more closely, pray more intentionally, and depend more deeply. These moments shape you far more than easy seasons ever could. Moving forward doesn't mean rushing. It means responding. It means taking the step you know is right, even if the outcome is unknown. It means trusting that God will meet you in motion, adjust your course when needed, and supply what you lack along the way. The unclear path teaches you how to walk by faith instead of sight. It forces you to release control, confront fear, and trust God with each step. Forward movement in uncertainty is not reckless. It is obedient. Faith is proven not when the road is clear, but when you walk anyway.